The theme of the next 2 minutes, 3 minutes, 5 minutes, whatever we take, is why we believe that the great outdoors has a big future for Americans. And Ruth has offered to give some personal testimonials and information why she, despite the rather substantial pressure that she has been under for more years than we want to talk about on the budget area, why she still believes that parks, local, state, federal, the rest of the great outdoors has a big future for this country.
Yeah, just to let you guys know, to give a little context, in California we've had a lot of budget cut threats, first by Schwarzenegger with lots of park closures being threatened, and the legislature reversed it and the governor reversed it, and then Jerry Brown came in and cut us $22 million, which, given all the previous cuts we'd had for the 20 years earlier, is sort of forcing us to really rethink the size of our system. And so at this point we're proposing to close 70 parks, or at least we will no longer operate 70 parks, which constitutes about 25% of our system. It does represent only about 8% of our visitation and revenue, so we were going up. A lot of the parks that are on the list had low visitation and revenue, but nonetheless they're really significant. And so, you know, how do you stay positive now that I just won what my daughter used to always say, "Mom, you're such a fun sucker." As a teenager say to moms when you're saying, "No, you have to be home at midnight. I don't care what time your friend's coming home." And so we actually have a fun sucker award we give every Monday to whoever has the worst news in our executive meetings. So, you know, a little Dallas humor gets you through. But nonetheless, you know, through all this, I just sort of want to share with you some of the things that I've seen happening, and just sort of reflect a little bit on what's going on in California, because usually, as I say, goes California, goes the rest of the country, so here you go. First of all, you have to ask, why is it, I mean, I think the fact that we're being cut is such a small dollar amount. Why is it that they're doing it? And it's because we're relevant to so many people in the public. We're a political football because we matter to people. So right there you have relevancy. That is ours and we own it, and it's really up to us to hang on to that. I was told by a leader of the Senate, a staff person, because I was whining a couple of years ago, "Why do you guys always pick on us? Why are you cutting us? It is such a small amount of general fund. You have $12 billion hole and we're a $20 million cut, seriously?" And he's going, "Ruth, we're cutting poor people and we're really hurting poor people, and voters don't care, but when we cut you, we're cutting the middle class and they care, and that's how we communicate it. You represent the middle class." And so it has no question been one of the noisiest budget cuts. I always remind people in every administration I work for that the political price per general fund dollar saved is the highest when you're cutting state parks. And in fact, Arnold Schwarzenegger received more letters of anger from the public on park closures than he did on all the other issues combined. So the reason that we get cut is sometimes because they actually want to be communicating to the public. So it kind of cuts both ways, if you will. So we are clearly first in their hearts. Unfortunately, we're also kind of last in their wallets. And so that's one of the problems that we're always facing, is that these cuts happen and people scream and yell, but then they tend not to get restored because politicians don't quite feel the same way about parks as the public does. So, and California, whereas when Jerry Brown was governor the first time, our budget at the California state parks received around 90-some-odd% of their money from taxes. Now he's governor this time around, and we're going to be down to 28%. So there's a huge shift in the 2 times that since he was governor the first to the second. Obviously he had nothing to do with the time in between, but shows you the trend that I think we're in for, is that the public's willingness to pay for general purpose activities is really sort of on the decline, and a lot of what we do is a public good. So the challenge for us is, how do we fund the public good aspect and keep these places open when there's you know, where there's so much competition for that public dollar. And so when you're down to 28%, you really have to start retooling yourself. You really have to start transforming, and that's probably the hardest thing that I'm facing right now, is trying to transform my own institution. The public is ready to charge ahead. It's the staff that are still a little bit are still very much in denial, and you're getting a lot of resistance. And so I think that's the art for all of us who are leaders in organizations. So I want to talk to you a little bit where the public is and some of the positive things that have been happening. All right, so we have a lot of press going on in California, a lot of articles. People are reading these articles. They're seeing pretty pictures of parks, and they're going, "Wait a minute, I used to take my kids to that park. We have 3 different instances where wealthy people saw articles and said, hey, I'm going to write a check. They're really going to close this place, I'm going to write a check. One of them was actually several years ago. It was for a place called 415 Pacific Coast Highway, which is the old Marion Davies estate. And a woman named Wallace Annenberg, who lives in, I think she lives either in Malibu or in Santa Monica, read the article about how decayed it was, and it was a disaster. She dropped $25 million. Okay, that's really unusual. We don't have very many of those. Great, cool though. I mean, it's an amazing facility. We own it, but it's being operated by the city of Santa Monica. But more recently, we have a donor. I talked to him just the other day, and he's very conservative, very wealthy guy in the Silicon Valley. Says, my friend's like, you're crazy, you know, this is like a taxes. He says, yeah, this is like paying taxes, but you know, this is tax where I get to say where it goes. He's going to write us a check for $300,000 for the next 3 years to keep Henry Co. open. We have another donor that read an article in the LA Times, and he's staying anonymous. And he went home to his wife and said, we used to take our kids to Los Encinos. This is one of the parks I thought was for sure going to be a little orphan. It's just this darling historic park in the what they call the San Fernando Valley. If anybody remember Valley Girls, that little jingle, that's how they talk. And so this little park is in that zone. And I thought, you know, it's one of those, it's almost a city park, but it has statewide significance because of its history. And this guy's writing a check for $150,000, and so the community is now mobilizing to try to match that, and that'll keep it open for a couple of years. These aren't sustainable solutions for the long haul, but it shows you the amount of passion that exists for everything we do. And so from that, I think I take a lot of heart, and I hope that it'll translate into maybe a longer term push as people see, no, really, we're serious. These places, a lot of them are going to close. I think if I'm optimistic, I think we'll probably be able to save around 35 of them, which I think is a really big number when you think we're starting from 70, that we will have 35 parks where there's going to be some sort of solution. Now, one of the things that's happened that I didn't expect is some of the counties, certain areas, they are forming alliances. So you're getting kind of the stone soup. If you guys remember that children's story of stone soup where everybody brings in one vegetable and all of a sudden you got something that's edible, even though the guy who wanted the soup in the beginning starts with a rock. So we're dealing with kind of a rock, and we're closing about 6 parks in Sonoma County. And they are pulling together, and you have this amazing alliance of a whole range of nonprofit organizations, and the county and the state, all sort of, everybody has a little bit to throw in. And so while we can't operate that park ourselves anymore, with all of these different partners coming together, I think we'll have some semblance of some kind of activity in those parks. Because a lot of what it takes to save a park is to have human energy inside of it. We're also seeing that same kind of alliance forming in Marin. The next phase for us will be, once we get sort of the nonprofit alliances written up and operating agreements with counties or cities or nonprofits who can save some parks, the next issue will be we'll put some of them out with requests for proposals and see if the private sector is interested in funding or operating some of them that have campgrounds. This is one where I think some of the private sector folks are starting to talk to the nonprofit side. Because I think there's a sweet spot potential here where you could get a nonprofit friends group who knows how to do volunteer coordination and interpretation, and that we would, as a state agency, we're going to still continue to monitor and try to do some of the natural resource management. But then you have a private vendor who knows how to run a campground. Our nonprofit partners don't know how to run campgrounds. They've been working with volunteers. They like to dress up in costume. They like to teach kids. They don't know how to run a campground. And we have 90,000 camp spaces in California that are run by the private sector and 15,000 in state parks. So obviously the big provider in California is the private sector. So they know what they're doing. So I'm really hoping that there will be some alliances formed, never done before, between a nonprofit and a for-profit that could then potentially deal with the fact that a park has a public good aspect and a private good aspect. And the nonprofit partner who can do some philanthropic fundraising can in essence start to that becomes sort of the substitute for tax dollars. We should never kid ourselves that these parks will ever be fully monetized and be able to be run in the private sector because they are a public good. I was an econ major, and one of the definitions of a public good is if there is a beneficiary who's not paying. And so just like with national defense, there's a whole lot of beneficiaries that benefit from these public lands that we manage, and they haven't been born yet. And you're never going to be able to bill them for it. And so the private market will never optimally produce these public lands. It's just not the way it works. So the way we have to start funding it when the public dollars are going away is you got to sort of find some substitute of sort of like a local community tax, if there's oil excise fees, a business improvement district, philanthropy, something that substitutes for the public dollars that are getting lost. Other areas that give me a source of optimism is the whole health connection that we talked about. And I know you had a panel earlier today, I heard a portion of that. And there's like, what do you say, $120 billion that is going to be spent on obesity. And so the question is, how are we going to get a piece of that? Because we are the low-cost provider for healthcare. We are an extension. We are a part of the healthcare delivery system. It's just we have to kind of tell that to the health industry. And they're starting to listen. I'm going to be on a conference call as a featured speaker on Thursday with the Centers for Disease Control, and I'm doing as president of NA, of National Association of State Park Directors, talking about some of the things state parks are doing across the country to try to connect to the health industry. Just a couple of local anecdotes. There was an article in the Sacramento Bee, I think it was just Monday, where there's this community called Natomas, and interesting, they said 25 of the churches are pulling together and talking about how they're going to get their parishioners healthier. And what's the first big event they're doing? They're taking them on a big walk around the lake. So health and outdoors are integrally connected, and a lot of times people don't even realize that's what they're doing. But I do believe that our public lands are going to be so important to keeping healthcare costs down. It's just sort of the whole mechanics of healthcare has to kind of fall in line for prevention to become something that starts getting funded. Because right now prevention is grossly underfunded. We fund sickness, we don't fund prevention. We don't fund health, we fund sickness. So you got to find the partners that are interested in funding health because it's in their best interest. And that's where I'm meeting sometime this month with, having a subsequent meeting with a major corporation that I don't want to name because we haven't got a deal signed with them. But it's a corporation that has large headquarters near one of our state parks called Mount Diablo State Park. And what we're offering to them, and their lobbyist is very excited about it, and he's certainly gotten his HR director interested enough to be willing to meet with us, is we're saying, if you give us $1 million over 3 years, we'll let your employees all have free access all the time to Mount Diablo State Park, and they just show us their Chevron ID, because we're trying to keep it simple, so it can be right. Oops. Can you not film this? Chevron hasn't said yes, so maybe they'll say no. So let's give them the space to say no. But the idea is that they were intrigued by was the idea of what would it take to motivate their employees to come into a state park on a regular basis with their families. And what we would do with the money they give us is hire an interpreter who would set up programs for those families, so that there's something for people to do when they get to the park. And in addition, we're encouraging them to use all of their fitness instructors that exist in the headquarters there to start using the park as a place for mountain biking and other kinds of activities. So I think there's a potential for getting some actual operating dollars through this health thing. It's going to take a lot of creativity, but it gives you some room for optimism. So I just want to leave you with something I saw, a couple of thoughts. I have to read this because I saw it in the airport, and if you really want to know what matters, is you got to look at Madison Avenue and pop culture and what advertisements are saying. So if you go through Chicago Airport, I don't know exactly where this sign is because it's somewhere between B concourse and F concourse, and I had a long time, so I walked it. Okay, so there's this big sign up that's called, let's see, where did I put it? It's by Prudential, and it's called day1stories.com. I guess you can look at all their day one stories, but it's an ad that's directed towards retirees. And the sign says, these are photos from their first day of retirement. Imagine yours. And it's a montage of all these photographs. So I went up close and I looked at all the photographs. I looked at every one of them. There's got to be 100 pictures up there. Only one was indoors, and that was somebody on a treadmill. Every single other picture was outside, and the landscapes were beautiful. So clearly what these baby boomers are looking for is an outdoor experience. And it's up to us to figure out what are the venues and what are the services that we're going to offer that's going to draw them in, and that's going to require that you amp up some of what you do. Which I get resistance in my own department when we talk about putting in better cabins or some cabins, but if you put in cabins, you will get new demographics. We have a park that I partner with Warren back there, Bernie Falls, and the ranger told me, Ruth, I was so opposed to this when you put in all these little cabins. They're kind of like hard tents. They're not elegant. This is not high-end stuff. This is just a bed. But he said, when you put them in and you took out some existing campground sites, I was really opposed, but I have to tell you, because you said you were doing this because you wanted new demographics, we're getting Asians, We're getting East Asians. He says, I don't know how they're finding it. I think they're using Facebook or something. Mr. I went there camping a couple of summers ago, and the place, a lot of Japanese, and that is not a demographic that we typically see in our state parks. So offering different services, give you new demographics, broadens your base, gives you room for political support. In California, if you have a park bond on the ballot, it is Los Angeles Latinos that put it over the top every time. Now, they didn't vote for our $18 fee thing. So they weren't interested in doing, and they weren't willing to pay a tax on their car, but they'll vote for park bonds, and it's always the Los Angeles County vote that comes in that puts it over every time. So it's a demographic that really, really cares, and so we want to use them. The last thought I want to leave with you is something that came to me from somebody overseas, and it really ties into this video that's going overseas. I was giving a talk at a place called the Bohemian Grove, and as a chick, you know, you're normally not allowed even in there, but they have once a year, they have this family day. This happens to be a place where like really, really famous people, rich guys go and they play and whatever. But I was invited to speak to the Center of Irons group. And so I'm talking to all of these people, and it was men and women and their families, and it turned out one of the people hearing me was from Italy. And I was talking about the park closures and the partnerships and some of the creative things we're trying to do to solve it. And afterwards he came to me and he said, you know, I'm from Italy, and us Europeans, when we think of you Americans, when we think of America, our image of America are your landscapes. It's kind of amazing to me that that our tourism people haven't been using that, because that's certainly the image of the rest of the world, of America, is what you just saw. All those national parks. And the first one, by the way, Yosemite, that was a state park. Started in 1864 as a state park. I want it back after they finished that general plan from health. But nonetheless, that is the image of the United States. And he says, you know, if you think of Italy, you don't think of landscapes. That's not what Italy is about. You think of our cathedrals. So when you talk about closing your parks, I think as an Italian, that would be like us closing our cathedrals. Unthinkable. How can you be closing your cathedrals? And I think because these places are of religious significance to Americans, and there is not a single religion calendar out there that has a picture of a toll road in it, that have those pictures in it. That you have the religious community pulling together to take people out of doors. In Virginia, I talked to my friend, a guy who works with parks, and they do really well politically, and I said, how do you do so well in a conservative state? He said, we have really strong connections to the religious community, and what they tell us is that we love parks because this is where our children find God. This is what makes me optimistic, that we're not going to be completely dead in the water in 20 years like our friends in the Postal Service. Because we have something that humans need at the depth of their core. It's religious, it's health, it's who we are, it is what it means to be an American. So,